Embark with us, dear listener, on a journey into the shadowy realms of the dark side, a land where the border between reality and the unearthly is faint. Here we dive headfirst into the dark tunnel, revealing the ghosts of the unexpected. Engage with authors who've honed their craft in the eerie styles of horror and thrillers. Hear them narrate tales that freeze the blood and hasten the pulse. Each narrative a bone-chilling exploration of the darker recesses of the human psyche. Experience stories that blend fear with fascination, sending shivers down your spine while capturing your curiosity. Each word, each phrase, a plunge deeper into the enigma of the unknown. So, courageous listener, fortify your nerves and succumb to the allure of darkness. Welcome to the dark side, where the shadows chatter and the grotesque holds sway.
There we are. Well, welcome to the Echoes of the Inner Sanctum, where we have authors and filmmakers who delve into your darkest fears, your worst nightmares, and maybe a little comedy once in a while. Anyway, I'm delighted to have my guest today is Brandon. Say it again.
Rhiness.
Rhiness. Brandon Rihness. The Brandon Rihness. He does comic books, he writes books, and he's a filmmaker. So tell us a little bit about yourself first, would you, Brandon? Just a little background.
Yeah, I'm based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and yeah, I do comic books, I write novels, and I guess right now for the last few years I've mainly been a filmmaker. It's kind of taken up most of my time. I make my living writing screenplays, so I've written a lot of movies for other people and stuff. And I've also written and directed some of my own, which are available to watch, on Amazon and Tubi and other platforms. I'm probably most known for Hot Box, my stoner comedy, and Grotesque, which is a slasher comedy. And I'm known for, I got 2 books, which I got here, the I'm Haunted and The Man in the Box. And I'm Haunted is actually a movie series that I turned it into a movie series. We just released part 2 a few weeks ago, and we start shooting part 3 here in the next few weeks.
Right. Did you originally start writing novels or screenplays?
It's kind of hard to say. Like, I guess originally novels. I started writing when I was a very little kid, and I would write, short stories. But throughout adulthood, screenplays was basically where I put my focus, and that's where I started making money. So that's kind of where my attention went. And it wasn't until just a few years ago where I decided to, I hadn't written kind of prose in so long that I decided to kind of jump back into it and publish a couple books. So right now I'm trying to juggle them both, but my main focus is screenplay writing.
Now, what about the genre? I mean, when you started actually writing, would you say you started on your novels at what age and screenplays?
I would say, honestly, novels was just, within the last 5 years. Screenplays, I've always dabbled. I was probably 16 when I wrote my first one.
Oh, really?
It was terrible. Throughout my entire 20s, I kind of dabbled in screenwriting. I tried to make a couple short films. Well, I guess I did make a few short films, but they were bad. I just never took it seriously. It was just something I kind of did as recreation. It wasn't until I was kind of in my early 30s, I got laid off from my day job. And then I was kind of like, you know what? I just started kind of making a little bit of money at film and writing. So I was like, you know what? Instead of getting another job I hate, why don't I jump in full time and see if I can make this happen for real? And I was like, I'll take it a month at a time. I had some unemployment insurance to, last for 6 months. And I was like, I'll just take it a month at a time. And if I ever run out of money, I'll go get another job. And so I just kind of dove in and started writing like hell. And here we are, 8-9 years later now. And I'm still taking it a month at a time, but I'm still keeping it going. And I'm writing more, and I've got, little bits of money coming in from different sources, and I've started making movies, and I'm starting to get known for that. And the movies help sell the books, and the books help sell the movies, and so I've kind of just built this operation, and I'm hoping to keep it going.
Are you married?
I'm not. Honestly, I don't think I'd be able to do this if I was married and had a family, because I have to
bring home the bacon. Right.
Yeah, yeah. You don't make a lot of money from selling indie books on Amazon, as I'm sure a lot of your
Right.
fellow authors out there know. So I have to live on very little, and a lot of the money I do, basically all the money I do make gets kicked back into doing future projects and everything. So I'm
Well,
hoping one day.
do you know Dean Koontz's story about his beginning in writing?
No.
Yeah, he got published really early, and his wife Greta is just so supportive. He made a pact with her that if he wasn't making a decent living in 5 years, he'd give it up and go back to teaching or whatever, right? But what he did when he made his first 350,000, well, the worst thing he did is he had an editor that told him you can't do cross genre. If you're going to write science fiction, you got to use a different pen name. If you're going to write horror, so he had like 3 books in the bestseller list under 3 different pen names, right?
Oh.
When he got his first 350,000, he took it. He bought all the rights back from those publishers and put Dean Koontz on the cover. And I mean, that takes kind of courage to take your first big amount of money and reinvest it in yourself. But smartest thing you ever did, you know. I have young writers. Don't you find there's kind of like a paranoid thing with writers a little bit? Some people write a whole book or short stories and they throw them in a drawer, you know. And other people are like, oh, I don't know if I want to put my real name on this, you know. I might offend somebody, you know. But you have to, well, you know, to be a filmmaker or a writer, you got to have dragon scales, right? Because somebody out there is going to be nasty, you know. But that's the way it goes. Anyway, what about, let's see, you're about 40-ish?
Yeah, ish.
Ish? Okay. I got you beat by a little bit more. Okay. All right. Did you really get into horror in your teens as a genre?
I kind of seemed to get into horror late. Like I watched a couple horror movies when I was very, very little, and they kind of traumatized me. So I was scared of it for when I was a child. And even as I got into my teens, it wasn't just something I ever thought about. I was probably 16, 17 when I started watching horror again and realized, like, oh my God, I love this. And then I really got into it, and I still am to this day.
Remember your first horror movie?
Yeah, the very first one I watched was Return of the Living Dead Part 2, which is funny because I watch it now and it's a horror comedy. It's pretty hilarious. But when you're 8 years old, it's kind of freaky.
Is that the one where they grabbed the mic and said, "Send more cops"?
That was part 1. Yeah,
that was funny. Yeah. Well, the original with I met George Romero at one of the horror cons. Very nice man. Very whatever. And I'm thinking about going to the one here, but there's only a couple of actors that I really like to meet. You know, I went years ago. I mean, Linda Blair and everybody you can think of, from Tom Skerritt to Linda Blair to the one that was in Cujo. There were like about maybe 20, and even pardon my French. Oh, the guy that's crazy now, and his son's an actor.
Gary Busey.
Gary Busey. Yeah, I took this rather attractive woman with me, and he sat down. She sat down next to him. She didn't tell me till afterwards, but he was trying to put his hand up the back of her blouse as she was sitting there getting a picture. I said, "Man, you should have stood up. We could have 15 minutes of fame if you slapped him." You know? But he was crazy. Anyway, my first horror movie was weird. I was like in 3rd grade. I went to a fairly well-off friend's house for a birthday party. And for some reason, we were upstairs, and there were like used to have little dens back then. And there was a movie on called The Lodger with Laird Krieger, which was an old 1950-ish Jack the Ripper tale. And it just struck me. You know, I didn't know why, but it just captured my whole fantasy totally. If you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. Take a look, because Laird Krieger was supposed to be a leading man, but he was rather portly, and the look on his face, I haven't seen anybody do Jack the Ripper better. just when they go into a close up, the insanity and the intensity in his gaze and his eyes is just remarkable. So that's kind of what it was. And then, did you read the classics in horror at all, like Poe or Lovecraft?
I've read some Poe. I'm not a big Lovecraft fan. I just never got into it. But I've read, Dracula, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I've read a lot of those. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I can remember reading them. I just, my mom took me to the library, and after I saw those old Roger Corman, Vincent Price Poe movies, and I wanted to check out an Edgar Allan Poe book, and the librarian said, "Oh, that's the adult section." But my mom said, "Then give him an adult card right now." So she was somewhat supportive, at least. Yeah. What about? Hold on. What about classic horror movies? Did you watch the Hammer films or the Vincent Price ones, or?
Yeah, I've watched quite a few. I've watched pretty much all of the original, like the Universal Monster movies. I check out that box set. I've seen quite. I think I've seen. I don't know if I've seen all of the Hammer Draculas, but if not close to it. And yeah, and I guess Exorcist. I don't know if you consider that classic. I guess it is by this point. Rosemary's Baby,
Sure.
like that era of movies. Yeah, I definitely love those.
Yeah. You remember the first, so you didn't actually see one of the Universal horrors till you were older on a DVD or VHS?
I probably saw like Frankenstein and Dracula, like the main ones. I probably saw when I was, late teens, early 20s. And over the years, I've just managed to see the rest of them.
Yeah. They stand the test of time. I tried to watch the old Bela Lugosi Dracula a couple months ago, and the lighting, the atmosphere is great, but he comes off as really cheesy,
I hate to be the one to say it, but I don't think Dracula is that good of a movie. The original, I know it's considered a classic, and there's good elements to it, but compared to like Frankenstein, it's not a very well done movie. Like I think at the time it was kind of a cheaply made, rushed kind of thing.
Yeah,
I don't think it's people like to think.
I know that. Remember, they even shot a Spanish version using the same sets and the same script and everything. Yeah, but it opened the floodgates to do Frankenstein. My favorite was Bride of Frankenstein.
Bride of Frankenstein is very. I'd say like the first two, I would consider them equal. They're both very well made.
Yeah. Then, well, don't you think they all kind of go downhill after the first two, no matter what the?
Yeah, they're. I do. I like all like Frankenstein, Wolfman, like all the crossover ones. I still like them. They're still cool to watch. They're not as good as the original ones. They just didn't have the budgets, and they kind of took like a silly route with them a little bit. They kind of got ridiculous, but I still like even the bad ones. I still love them.
Which actor do you think was the best Dracula on film?
Christopher Lee, I think, would be my favorite.
Really? Did you ever see the Dracula in the 70s with Frank Langella?
I don't think so.
Oh, you should see it. It's Frank Langella plays Dracula, and he's young and handsome and just virile and charismatic. And Laurence Olivier plays Dr. Van Helsing. And the interchange between the two of them are really interesting. And I read an interview he did where they shot it in a castle somewhere in Europe, and it was freezing cold, and they kind of shared like two adjoining bedrooms with the same bathroom and everything. And well, I really can't go there with some of this stuff, but Olivier would kind of flirt with him and tease him, even though he wasn't gay. And there's a famous scene where he rides up in the horse to the graveyard, and supposedly it's Olivier standing over Lucy's grave. But they said when they shot it, Olivier just wasn't in the mood to shoot that day, so he did his whole lines to a mop stuck in the dirt. But for being a filmmaker, you get that, right? Yeah. What about current horror authors? Who did you read first?
Ooh, it's hard to say. I don't read as much horror as I should. Like most of the horror I do read are the more older classic ones, but I've read the Exorcist book multiple times. I love that book. Right. I probably read it 5 or 6 times. Amityville Horror, I really like that one. I've read a few times. And I've read a lot of. I kind of got into Stephen King. I guess he'd be the one that kind of opened the floodgates for me. I read like all his early stuff, and then kind of something happened over the year. I don't know if I grew out of him or I just stopped liking his style. But I tried to read some of his newer books and just can't really get into them. So I don't know if that's his style changed or it's something in me that changed. But he's definitely the one that opened up the horror genre to me.
Right. You don't like Dean Koontz at all?
I've read. I remember reading something of his. I just can't remember what it was, but yeah, I never really read that much of him.
Yeah. What I like about him is, well, he invented the cross genre and really mass market thrillers. Really takes a supernatural, police procedural, classic whodunit thriller and science fiction, and throws it all into one kettle. But his shtick, which worked for him, is to say, this looks like it's really supernatural. And in the end, he explains it away as something logical. But yeah, I agree with you, King. I just, his early books were good. It was kind of good. Christine was very good. But now the editors won't edit his work. He could write it on toilet paper and they'd publish it. But like Hearts in Atlantis, they made into a great movie with Anthony Hopkins, but they only used like the first 40 pages of a 750 word book. And that's where I stopped reading it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about, I had a debate about this. Do you consider these movies as horror? Jaws, Alien?
No.
No, really?
No, I don't. Honestly, I can see the argument that they are, and I see their reference as. I don't see them as horror. Like same as Silence of the Lambs, people consider that horror. I consider it thriller. Jaws is like monster movie or thriller. Alien is like sci-fi. There's obviously horror elements into it, but if I had to give them one genre, I would not say they're horror.
Really? That's interesting. Because you think about Alien, it's sci-fi, but it's the closed crampedness of the ship that heightens the tension and the little. Yeah.
There's definitely horror elements in there, but if I had to pick, I've thought about that a lot. I've had the debate with people that, same with Jaws. It's like, people getting eaten by a shark. There's horror elements. There's the suspense, but I wouldn't put them as horror first.
Yeah, I know. I interviewed someone and they said that they had met Richard Dreyfuss at a horror convention. I had to go, why was he at a horror convention? And the guy said, Jaws. I said, oh, okay. I guess that kind of fits a little bit, doesn't it? Yeah.
I love those movies. Like I love Jaws. I love Aliens. I love Silence of the Lambs. Like, so it's not a knock against those movies. I just wouldn't consider them like full on horror.
What's the very first horror movie? Just stick with horror thriller that you took a date to.
That I took a date to.
Jeez. Yeah, that's hard, huh?
Because the funny thing is, I never really saw horror movies in theaters when I was younger. Because when I was a kid, my parents didn't watch them, so I never went. I was probably in my like late 20s or something, maybe even later, before I actually saw a horror movie in the theater.
Well, how about any movie on your first date? Do you remember? I mean, not your very first date, but the first when you took a girl.
I think the Tarantino movie, Jackie Brown. I remember going on a date to that.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Off the top of my head, the earliest horror that I could think of was The Conjuring 2, which was fairly recently. That's the first one I can remember. Because, I just find a lot of people, even like girls I've dated, are not horror fans. Even Cynthia, now she won't even come to my movies when I have a premiere. So I've always found it's hard to find. I have buddies that are into horror and stuff, but it's for the number of horror fans out there. I don't know. Maybe it's just the kind of the circles I associate with, but I've always have a hard time finding someone to go with. I don't watch that many horror movies in the theater because, I don't know. That's maybe just the way I
haven't either. We went to see the new Omen Beginnings, and that was excellent. If you haven't seen it,
No, I haven't seen it.
That recent Exorcist was terrible, but this was very original, great writing, great acting, and I'd say right up there with the first Omen. Actually, the other ones were so-so. The second one was pretty good, but yeah, if you haven't seen it, it's really worth seeing. My wife, who doesn't like horror, just loved it. She just recognized the script and the cinematography and the acting was just so good in it. Yeah. Well, thing about taking girls to horror movies, I don't know if it's a real quote, but in that movie that Johnny Depp made, Ed Wood, remember, where he's sitting in Bela Lugosi's house with Martin Landau, and Landau says, "Take her to see Dracula. Young women will be hugging you and squeezing you in terror."
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, the first one that I can recall, of course, if you're going to argue with me, it was Alien. And back then, they only had like maybe 2 or 3 movies playing. And I was single, so I ended up taking 3 or 4 different women to go see Alien over and over again. But
Nice.
Thank God now you can, go see any one of 12 or 24 movies. But yeah, interesting. All right, well, let's get into your filmmaking a little bit more. The one that really interested me was Marking of a Murder. Is that the name of it?
Markings of Murder, yeah.
Yeah. Now it says on there that you co-wrote it.
Yeah, it was directed by Jarvis Greiner, he's actually directed a couple, at least 2 movies that I've written the scripts for. I think he came up with the concept. Someone came up with the concept, and they gave me kind of like a 1-page or couple-page outline for Markings of Murder, and I wrote the screenplay based on that. And I think Jarvis or some other people kind of did some rewrites on that at some point. And the movie, it just came out recently. I've seen it. They've had a couple film festival screenings. It hasn't been released publicly yet, but I think it turned out very well.
So you didn't actually collaborate with another writer from the beginning. It was just like some rewrites later.
Yeah, I was hired to write a story based on their outline. So I wrote the script, and then at that point, other people kind of took it from me, and Jarvis rewrote it himself, and kind of added his own spin to it, which he's done on other projects. He's a good writer too. So, and then it's part of the business. Is kind of I rewrite other people's work, they rewrite mine, and it's kind of just the way things work in the film business.
Yeah. Did he allow you to be on set when he was filming it?
I wouldn't say I wasn't. I don't think I've ever been on a set of a movie that I didn't write myself, or if I have, it's been very, very few times. To me, it's considered work, right? It'd be like going to work on your day off. If I'm not working that day, it's I got other things I want to do. Watching on a film set is not exciting to me anymore. And to be honest, especially since I'm kind of like a known filmmaker around here, and I wrote the script, I'm always kind of worried that people will be worried I'm judging them, and it'll just be awkward that I'm there. So it's like, what, my part of the job is done. I wrote the script. It's now up to them to go off and make it, and so I kind of let them go off and do their thing. I'm sure they would have welcomed me with open arms if I wanted to come on set, though.
Yeah, it's kind of something you just have to accept. It's like, I think I saw a diagram one time. It showed, fairly stack of pages. It was a script, and then it showed, after the first edit, second edit, and then when it came down the movie, it was, about a quarter of that stack of the original script. So, no, I just asked because I tried to collaborate one time with somebody. I just can't do it because you have to be really in the same groove totally. But
it's hard. Yeah, people have different ideas they bring to it and everything. Like Jarvis, actually, how when I met him was I wrote a script called John 3:16 about a guy at a mental institution that thinks he's Jesus, and that's how I got to know Jarvis. And we kind of collaborated on that script. I wrote the original draft myself, and then we met and collaborated on it. And he's got a lot of good ideas, but it's a different mentality. Like actually sitting in a room with someone and trying to write it together, it's hard for me to do. I don't mind writing something and then giving it away. Right. I don't mind writing something that someone else gives me a script and asks me to, improve it or change it. I can do that, but trying to team up with someone, it's hard to do.
I think comedy writers, it's different. They sit around a table and they just pitch jokes and ideas and then kind of throw it all in a basket and say, there you go,
Yeah,
But that's a different process.
different. Yeah, for when I wrote Hot Box, like I wrote the script and then I just kind of picked a few kind of comedian type people from my area. We all met up and it's like, okay, let's go through the script and then just add in as many jokes as we can. And that was kind of a good process to do, like kind of like a writer's room kind of thing. So, but a lot of the time, like I consider like writing as a solitary thing that I just do myself. So it's working with others on that step of the process is hard for me.
What about, do you watch any of the horror thriller series on Netflix or Prime?
I really don't. I don't watch a lot of TV shows. I think honestly, the last show that I watched religiously was probably Breaking Bad.
Oh, that
Which
was
has
pretty
been,
well written. Yeah.
yeah, it was excellent. But it was, I mean, it's starting to, years have passed since that. There's too many of them that it's like, I'm busy trying to work and I don't got time to watch, binge watch these entire series. And there's, they're kind of coming out faster than I can keep up with them. So I really don't watch a lot of the horror series. I'm kind of the mentality now that I kind of miss the days where everything didn't have to be its own universe, where it's just, here's the movie, it's one story, it begins and ends in that movie. Whereas now it's like spin-off characters and there's spin-off series, and now it's like you want to be into Star Wars now, you have to watch like 8 different series and 12 different movies, and I just they're not as good as they used to be, and I just quite frankly don't want to invest that much time. I wish they just put more focus into one solid story, make one good movie, rather than this movie is part of this ever increasing world, and it's just something about it doesn't sit well with me. I kind of want to focus more on one story that doesn't have to turn into.
And lately, Hollywood remakes and remakes and remakes the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And you just can't. Like they did that with Kubrick's The Shining. They made it into a TV episode. And I remember reading that King didn't like The Shining. I would give my left arm to have Kubrick make a movie out of my book with Jack Nicholson, But well, I'm guilty of it, but there's been a lot of good stuff. And I think I only watched half of the first season, but the Bates Motel, and it has Vera Fianca, the one that's in the Conjuring movies, plays if you haven't watched it, it's worth it. She just steals every scene. She's just such a great actress. And then Freddie Highmore from The Good Doctor plays Norman. But I wanted to ask him or his agent whether the producers and director called him in for an audition or he just went, because he's not the kind of person you'd ever pick to play Norman Bates. Just, he was a child actor in that Never-Ending Story where he flew on the big white bird and everything,
Yeah.
But the innocence about him, the youthfulness and the baby face about him works totally when he flips into being Norma, and then there was another good one, The House of Usher, you should look at too. It was loosely based on Poe, but the acting was really good, and the writing you'll love the writing. It's just amazing. Generally there's a saying, right, that the book's so much better than the movie. Would you agree with that kind of?
For the most part, yeah, the books are better. There's a few movies I've seen that are better than the book, but I'd say generally speaking, books tend to be better than the movie. You can just go so much deeper. Like with The Exorcist, like I love that. I love the movie too, but the movie is basically just like a synopsis of the book. It's like they just took a little bit from each scene, and it doesn't go even like anywhere near as deep as the book does. So it's almost like once you see the movie in the book, the movie's not so good anymore because it's like, oh man, like it just skims the surface.
Can you name one where the movie was better than the book?
The Devil's Advocate, the one with Al Pacino and Keanu Reeves. That book was
just an absentee landlord. Yeah.
I think even the landlord, or even the author of the book was like, yeah, that movie's way better. Fight Club. I think the movie's way better than the book. It's not horror, but
I was so enamored with the movies, I didn't even try to read the book. But I
Yes.
kind of go back. I do my research. Like when I saw The Ninth Gate with Johnny Depp, I wanted to go back and see what story that was based on. And when I saw Eyes Wide Shut, I wanted to see what novella that was based on. And did you know that was actually written like in the 18th century, I think, and it was in Venice, and it was really an attack on the aristocracy and their decadence. There wasn't really the aspect of the satanic cult thing in it, but that movie's just so surreal and frightening as hell, and even Tom Cruise wasn't bad in it. I'm surprised,
Yeah.
He's
it was Kubrick's last movie too, so it kind of ended.
Oh yeah, I mean his dad, was a portrait photographer, and if you look at a Kubrick movie, every frame is like a portrait with the lighting, and the colors, and the set direction, the art direction. It just we lost him way too early, and then we just lost Roger Corman this week. That's really
just a couple days ago. Yeah,
and he gave what Bogdanovich a star, Francis Ford Coppola.
Jack Nicholson, and a lot of them.
And the guy that did Silence of the Lambs, Jonathan Demme, he gave them all starts, It's kind of like, well, did you ever think you should have done like Spielberg and just talk your way on to Universal Pictures or Paramount and just work there for nothing because somebody decides to pay you?
It's just a different path. I got a bit different too, as I live in Canada, so getting down to the, LA is not as easy, but there's the thing about what I do is like I have a lot of control over my movies, even though they're very, very low budget.
Right.
I've done stuff for like bigger like production companies and studios, and all of a sudden you start like the money's better, but all of a sudden you're not in control anymore.
Yeah.
And basically it ends up you're just doing it for the paycheck, and it's not a fun experience. Where when I make a movie like Grotesque, it's like I can do whatever I want. I write it, I direct it. No one's looking over my shoulder. I have all this freedom.
Right.
So it's a lot more creatively satisfying. So it's like I could go to Hollywood and, I could make a decent living. But I've had friends, they moved to Vancouver to go pursue, and they end up working on these big budget TV shows and stuff. And then they're just all of a sudden they hate their job. They're just like, they're on these big union shoots. And it's like, pay is good. But all of a sudden it's like, everyone there is miserable, and it's like the magic is gone from it.
Yeah.
So
I think it's the only ones I think that can deal with the studio thing. Remember, there's that great scene in the Ed Wood movie with Johnny Depp where he's got this meat packing plant guy has his nephew in the movie, and he comes out dressed as Glenda. And he storms off and he goes to a bar and he ends up talking to Orson Welles about how the studios want to control everything and your producers. It was just a great scene. But I'm just thinking of some authors. Jonathan Ferris that did the Fury book, they let him write the screenplay, which gave him total control over it, right? And who else was I just thinking of? Oh, Ira Levine with Rosemary's Baby and Sliver. He was a playwright first. So, and if you ever read Rosemary's Baby, it's like a screenplay. He's that lean.
Oh yeah, I've read it. It's identical to the movie.
Yeah, so he really can't say he lost control of it at all, But I remember when I was at a sci-fi convention, I can't remember the author's name, but he wrote this book called Vampires. And I think it was Jimmy Woods and somebody else, and they were like modern day vampire hunters. And they let him on the set, and somebody that wrote the script, they were struggling over a line, and he just walked up and said, "No, the line should be this." And they went with it, but they kicked him off the set.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. What's the first screenplay you ever wrote? Well, forget the one in high school, I guess, but the first one you felt was a real screenplay.
I guess the first I wrote a I guess my first kind of real, what I consider short film. I wrote a short film called "I'm in Love with a Dead Girl" about a guy who digs a woman up in the graveyard and like falls in love with her. I directed that as my first real short film. And then I wrote
dead, or he just took her to the graveyard.
She's dead. She got killed in like a bicycle accident or something.
Oh,
It's on my YouTube. It's on the Higher Universe YouTube channel, which is my company. So if you want to check that on YouTube, it's there. It's actually quite popular. The first, I wrote a feature called Bad Cop, Bad Cop. It's supposed to be like a play on the fact of Good Cop, Bad Cop. Was that, it was kind of like a 1970s kind of cop movie. It never really got anywhere. I did show it to like quite a few people at the time. Honestly, now it's like I've improved so much I wouldn't even let anyone read it because it's not that good. But it did get me some attention. It actually got me some writing gigs because there's a few like kind of like Hollywood like people in LA that read it and they were like, yo, it's hilarious, but they're like, no one's ever gonna make this. Like it's insane. No. But they remembered who I was. So a couple years later, I would approach them again and be like, hey, I'm the guy that wrote Bad Cop, Bad Cop. By the way, I have this new script. And that I don't think anyone, like, they hired me, but some of them kind of gave my name to someone else that ended up hiring me to write some stuff. So it did open some doors for me. And then, yeah, that was at that point, I kind of just started cranking out the screenplays. And, some of them I would option or sell, or some of them would lead to some opportunity. Some I would make myself. Some are just still kind of sitting on my shelf waiting to be made. But yeah, I've written quite a few.
Yeah, I've toyed with it. I mean, I've played around with it a little bit. I just downloaded some screenplays to get the structure and everything. And what I've done with my writing classes, when people start writing, they tend to just overwrite, and they bring out that thesaurus and they want to write it, as King said, purple prose, and I'm kind of doing these interviews with horror, and I see that's kind of a mistake. A lot of them, they'll have a smitten of dialogue and then paragraph after paragraph of exposition, So what I did with my writing class, I said, first write the first 3 chapters as a screenplay, even if you don't know how, but look at some screenplays and then go back and fill in what you'd write in a novel. And then that way they're kind of thrust into putting the bare meat in there and then just peppering around it,
Yeah.
I mean, it's with movies, of course, it's an axiom of show, don't tell, right? You've only got the dialogue and the visual to tell the story, But have you noticed, since I've been watching a lot of, with the writer's strike and the actor's strike, Netflix had a lot of foreign series on. And I noticed in the foreign series, they use a lot of flashbacks, whereas Hollywood's kind of just done away with inner dialogue and flashbacks. If they use them, they're very sparingly. But in the foreign films, they have like a long, almost a separate movie that's a flashback, and they just keep intercutting it, at appropriate times in the film. But that's, what's kind of wrong with Hollywood sometimes, I think. They throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, and I think because even I remember when I was, kind of coming up as a screenwriter and I was doing all my research, that was the big thing, is they're basically like the voiceover and all that flashback stuff was being used too much. So they're like, get it. So maybe just kind of the pendulum swing the other way, where now they cut it out completely, which I kind of agree with. Like, I don't like movies that have a lot of flashbacks. Obviously there's exceptions, or movies that jump around in time. Like, I like a story to start and continue to the end and not, jump back and reference things like that. I mean, yeah, there's exceptions, but I try to avoid that myself as much as possible, but it doesn't mean that it can't be done well.
Yeah, I know. Like, what was that movie? Memento and Groundhog Day just drove me nuts.
Yeah.
Just kept, it's not that I can't follow a complex plot, but it just aggravated the heck out of me, period.
Yeah. Actually, now that you're talking about TV series, I did try to watch The Haunting of Hill House, and I thought it was well made, and there were a lot of well done scary parts in it. Mm-hmm. But the whole movie was constantly jumping around in time, and it just drove me to the point where I couldn't watch the movie anymore. Like, I think if they put everything in order, I would have liked it a lot better and gave it a chance. But you get into the story, and all of a sudden they jump back to a different character's point of view that happened, a couple years earlier, and then it kind of throws you off. Like, I don't know, I don't like that kind of story structure.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about I grew up with a different generation, but I see from Facebook and TikTok and that, especially the millennials and the Gen Z, they kind of grew up with slasher movies, period. Well, you even went, got Friday the 13th and Halloween, etc. But they don't really know the old stuff, and I don't even that bad, but most of them have never even seen Rosemary's Baby. But what I don't like about slasher films is they're a chase scene. There's no real backstory on the killer, why he's doing it. I mean, Halloween had just that little bit about him being a boy and killing his sister or something, but that doesn't really flesh out a motive. So you've got a monster or a thing just chasing somebody throughout the whole movie, And to me, chase scenes should be the third act, like they are in most movies, But I mean, not that I don't appreciate the first Halloween, and that was really good. And I don't know. I guess I'm just more of a classic. We know Lovecraft said that if you show the monster, you defeated your whole purpose in terror. That it's the sound from the other side of the door, the creaking footsteps, the room going cold, the scratching at the doorknob twisting, that is more terrifying. But once you open the door and you see the creature, then you've pulled the reader or the viewer's imagination totally out of it, which won't work in a slasher film or Godzilla or King Kong, of course, But when it comes to real classic thriller horror movies, I think I kind of agree with Lovecraft on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with it, but in a way, it's like you said, it makes sense for slasher movies. They're almost like a different genre. Like it's technically a horror movie, but in those, I would feel kind of cheated. Like even in some of the earlier Friday the 13th, you didn't really see the killer. In the first one, you didn't even know who the killer was until the end of the movie. But as you got later on, it's full on. You see Jason there the whole time, or it's Freddy. Like Freddy Krueger is the killer. There's no mystery. But for a slasher movie, it kind of has to be like that because the horror just comes from the suspense. You see the guy chasing the person. That's the level how deep it goes. Whereas, the classic horror movies, they benefited from being slower. And even Exorcist, I think my least favorite part is the exorcism at the end. Mm-hmm. Like it's kind of like once they kind of full on go that far, it loses it's not quite as good as the build up to it, which I find a lot scarier. So it's like, I think Lovecraft is right in that, but I don't think that rule applies to slashers, and it shouldn't, because slasher, you want to see the guy in the suit. And I don't think you really have to know where he came from. It's just here's a brief 2-minute thing of where he came from. That's all you need to know, and it's kind of like a cheaper form of horror, but I think there's still some level of enjoyment in it.
Sure. I just had a brain fart. What other? Oh, The Haunting, the first one and the remake with Liam Neeson. That's a classic example. You never really see the ghost. You never really see the evil. It's just omnipresent, and it's just little bits and bits. Like when the was it Juliet Harris or Lewis played the mousy little girl, and then in the remake was Catherine Zeta-Jones playing the starlet. And she wakes up in the morning thinking that she's been holding her hand all night, and then realizes there's nobody there. To me, that's terrifying. Because
that's so much better than.
I still don't let my feet and hands hang off the edge of the bed to this day. Yeah. Well, I think we pretty much about covered it. Where can we see your movies and your books now?
Yeah, if you just have my YouTube channel, Higher Universe. If you go on there, it has quite a few of my movies. They're also, if you look them up on Amazon or Tubi or Plex, some of those streaming services. If you just Google my name, they'll come up. Some of them they're available on different platforms, and some of them you can buy on DVD as well. You can go to my IMDb page and just look me up, and you'll kind of see my long list of projects I've been involved with. There's quite a few now.
Okay. I'm just going to put a banner up for you for that. Well, oh, there we are.
Google my name.
I had to figure out I was clicking on the wrong box. So anyway, well, thank you very much. Yeah, I always wanted to make a movie, but I think I'm getting a little bit too old. So, like I said, I was a radio, TV, film major, and I wanted something exciting, so I went into federal law enforcement. No regrets at all, but I think that's why when I was about 50, I just started to write. And I think what got me to write was I had been reading a lot of nonfiction. I started fiction. And when I read Dean Koontz's Seize the Night, I just said, well, I can do this. And it took me 5 years to get to that level.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. Okay, well, thank you, Brandon, very much. And
yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, and if you could tell any of your fellow authors or filmmakers to DM me on Facebook, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, I will.
All righty. Take care.
All right, sounds good. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.